Well, the best thing about law school is it was how eventually I met Allison. And at the end of law school, I was trying to decide what to do, whether to go work in a law firm or do pro bono work or whatever. And a judge in Madison, Wisconsin named Barbara Crabb was looking for a law clerk. A law clerk is somebody who works for the judge, reads the files, writes up draft opinions for the judge to edit and change around as the judge desires. And I was fortunate enough to be hired by Judge Crabb. I worked in the federal district court in Madison, Wisconsin, called the Western District of Wisconsin, from the fall of 1981 through the fall of 1982. And Allison was working for Judge Gansner in the same courthouse. So my law school background got me to law clerkship, and one day I needed a book, needed to read a case in a book, and the courthouse in Madison at that time was in the second floor of the post office building, the federal building in Madison. And the law library, instead of being in one place, there was no single room big enough for it. So it was spread out, the books were spread out in the different chambers of the judges. And this particular volume happened to be stored in Judge Gansner's chambers. So I walked into Judge Gansner's chambers one day, looking at the numbers on the book, said hello to his secretary as I walked in, and followed the numbering around the corner to where there was a desk, and there my lovely wife Allison was seated, and my first words to her were, "Do you have 325 Fed Sup?" Fed Sup is the name of a law book. It has cases in it. And she said, "Oh, it's right over here." And that was the extent of the conversation that day. So it was not a great introduction, but things got better from there. And we started dating each other in Madison. And Allison had fair warning about my interest in sports. I think our first date was going to watch a baseball game in the fall on TV at the Brat House on State Street in the fall of 1981. But Allison today, but back then, was quite an impressive person. She sang in a chorus, and I remember going to see the Messiah performed at the First Congregational Church, which is not far from where I grew up, from my West High School. And she sang in that beautiful choral piece. And she also had organized a rowing club in Madison. There was not really much rowing, which she had done as an undergraduate at Princeton. In Madison, I don't think the high schools had rowing teams. So if you were a high school kid or maybe even a college kid and you had an interest in rowing, there was nothing really you could do other than go out for the university team, and very few people made that team. So she had organized a club and raised money to buy shells and oars, and Allison was just incredibly not only attractive and wonderful person, but doing really impressive things. And so I'm very grateful that the law put us in touch in that courthouse. I'll tell a story about working for Judge Crabb, because 20 years later, got a laugh out of her and the other clerks that year. When I joined the Judge Crabb's staff, there was a large backlog of cases, and part of the reason for that is that the state and federal prisons, almost all of them, were located in the Western District of Wisconsin. If you can imagine Wisconsin split in half, Madison being in the western part and Milwaukee being the eastern part. The most populous state where most of the inmates came from was the eastern part, but the prisons were all located in the Western District for historical reasons. So we got a lot of prisoner petitions, and so imagine you're a prisoner spending a long time in jail. You probably want to go to the law library, because that's probably one of the few safe places in a prison where other inmates aren't going to bother you. And what do you do there but read cases and maybe file petitions with the court? The Seventh Circuit, which was the appellate court that reviewed decisions from the Western District of Wisconsin, was pretty open-minded as to prisoner petitions, and the district courts had to allow the prisoners to proceed in forma pauperis, which means in the form of a pauper, that is, without a lawyer and without paying fees, unless the case was very clearly frivolous. So we got a lot of prisoner petitions that we had to work on, and many of them were accepted by the court and could not be dismissed right away. You had to work on the case to a point where it either went to trial or was dismissed or settled. One of the inmates who inundated the court with petitions was a guy named Billy Roy Tyler, and he one day wrote a letter to the judge about something, and Judge Crabb handed the letter to me and said, "Would you please write back to Mr. Tyler, tell him the judge asked you to write to him and respond to his letter, and here's what you should say." So I did that, and by return post, it had to be a day or two, I got back a very nasty letter from Mr. Tyler saying, "Dear Westman, you ain't no MF judge," etc., 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 telling me I had no business responding to the judge. Well, after a year clerking, went on my way, and 20 years later, there was a party celebrating Judge Crabb's 20th anniversary of being a judge. So Allison and I went to Madison for that, and Judge Crabb and I and 3 other clerks who worked for her that year, and her staff, her assistant and other staff, were seated around the table, and I reminded everybody about that story, and everybody cracked up. Billy Roy Tyler actually was released from prison during the time that I was working for Judge Crabb. He actually came to the courthouse and went to the court clerk's office. So we were law clerks, which is different than the court clerk. The court clerk is the office that accepts papers and files them and keeps everything in order, schedules things. But the law clerks are in the judge's chambers, not the clerk's office. But he came to the clerk's office and thanked the staff, mainly ladies, who were so helpful to him during his time in prison. So he ended up not coming to court to tell me I ain't no MF judge, but to give thanks to the court clerks who had treated him so well, so professionally, during his years in prison. So that was an interesting window into prisons and prison culture, and I've never gotten another letter like that from anybody besides Billy Roy Tyler.